Hi class, Mr. K here. Purpose of this video, we're going to go over the first workshop that you guys did in class. Everyone worked really well on it. I saw everyone on task, and the majority of you were really on the right track in all four of these tasks. So this is just to make sure you guys all are on the same page, everyone has the right answers going forward as we go through this project. Bear in mind as well that a lot of these differences that we're going to be looking between the New England and the Southern colonies are going to pop up later in history and later in this course. So bear that in mind as we go through this. So after the entry event, you guys delved right into these different supporting questions and the supporting tasks. In the first one, we had you take a look at these maps of landforms, soil, and growing seasons in the American colonies, and kind of the differences between the New England colonies and the Southern colonies in terms of those three topics. As we answered the questions, basically what we were looking for in the New England colonies, there's not too much fertile soil. There's a lot of mountains, a lot of landforms that kind of make it hard for people to move goods and do a lot of things that they would do in other parts of the country, or I should say the colonies at this time. And the growing season was also relatively short. The climate was pretty cold, not very conducive to growing a lot of crops. Whereas in the southern colonies, it was basically the exact opposite. The soil is extremely fertile, there's a lot of flat plains that are conducive to growing crops, and most of all, the climate in the growing season was longer and a lot warmer. So in the southern colonies, as you can imagine, you'll see a lot more farming related to those ideas. As far as similarities, this was a little bit of a trick question, and most of you didn't get caught up on it. You said that there are some similarities, both have a little bit of mountains kind of going on in both regions, but other than that, there really isn't too many similarities, and that was the point. The New England and the Southern colonies are very different from the word go, and that has correlated to the northern and southern states, at least in the eastern part of our country, being very different as well. In the second task here, we had to take a look at a couple economic maps. Basically, once again, comparing the New England and Southern colonies and linking those differences in geography to the differences in the economics that took place in those regions. And as you look through the questions, number one was pretty easy. The most popular good in the South was definitely tobacco, and it's going to be tobacco for quite some time. As for the rationale as to why tobacco was so popular, I was looking for you guys to make that connection to the geography. The fact that it was such a long growing season, it was a warmer climate, the soil was a lot more fertile. Growing things like tobacco and crops, like tobacco, was a lot more doable, a lot more profitable in the South. So that's why it was more popular. Of course, the good obviously wasn't popular in New England for basically the converse argument. The fact that there wasn't a long growing season, the fact that there wasn't a lot of fertile soil, it made it a lot harder to grow crops, let alone successfully to make a profit. So that's why tobacco and crops in general really aren't pertinent in the New England colonies. And then the last question, what New England did, though, in order to stimulate their economy, they didn't farm, they intensified their manufacturing and their shipping and their trading. So New England, the ports like Boston and New York City and Baltimore, they became huge centers for trade, huge centers for manufacturing. And a lot of times European traders would go to these cities when they wanted to trade with the American colonies and later the United States. They would go to these cities that have ports, and that's where a lot of the trading would be. In the third question, you took a look at a couple excerpts, one from Slavery is Capitalism, and one which was a journal excerpt from a factory worker in New England in 1750. And the task was basically to compare the two. How was labor used, and what labor needs were needed in the Southern colonies in comparison to the New England colonies. And kind of like the differences in economics and geography, as you can imagine, the South was very heavily reliant on slavery because of these massive farms, these massive things called plantations, that they grew a lot of the tobacco and the other cash crops that they were growing. They needed a cheap source of labor in order to do that. And they satisfied that labor need by shipping in slaves from Africa and later in a little bit other parts of the world to meet this labor need. So that's why slavery is such a important part of the Southern economy at this time. The Southern colonies economy, I should say. Whereas it was a little bit different in New England. Slavery wasn't as popular. They didn't need a lot of cheap available labor just to go out and farm things. They needed people to be somewhat skilled in what they do. They needed people to man machineries and factories, load things on and off docks, things like that. And naturally, with a lot of ports along the New England colony shore, they satisfied this labor need with immigrant labor. Lots of Irishmen, Scots, English, Germans, Italians came over from Europe looking for work. And these people brought with them a lot of their nationalities, their languages, their cultures, which is an atonement to why you have such diverse populations in New York City and Boston today. So what we're really looking there for in your task answer was that New England used immigrant labor, the southern colonies used slave labor, and the differences in that labor stems to the differences in the economies of the two regions. For the final task that you guys had to do, task 4, we were basically taking a look at voting in early America and what you needed to be in order to receive not just voting rights, but citizenship rights, political rights, to be allowed to be involved in the political process. And all of you really came up with the right answers. Basically it came down to your race, your skin color. You had to be white. If you weren't white, you weren't going to be allowed to vote, let alone do the majority of things you would want to do in society. Number 2, you had to be male. No females allowed. We're not at the time where there's even the concept of gender equality whatsoever. So you had to be white, you had to be male, and then you also had to be a property owner. That was kind of the kicker, because there was a lot of white males living in the American colonies, but most of them weren't allowed to vote or be involved in the political process because they didn't own property. Owning that property gave you a sense of not entitlement, but it put you higher up on the socioeconomic scale in the American colonies. So you were viewed as more important, and because you owned that land and because you had something under your name that you owned, it was a very powerful statement, and you were allowed to and considered educated enough, basically, to take part in the political process and to vote. And then the second question for this, which is kind of interesting going forward, where these factors came from, where the reason that the American colonies said, okay, you need to be a white male property owner in order to participate in politics. It stems directly from old British traditions. They had very much the same. Property rights and property ownership was a very, very important and dividing factor in England throughout its history. If you owned property or owned land, you were a lot more highly viewed in society than someone that didn't. And the same thing goes for whites in terms of race and males in terms of gender. So we directly because we are British colonies, we are English colonies, those traditions that took place in Great Britain were transposed over here when they came and colonized the Americas. So overall, nice job. Very impressive. We're going to work on workshop 2 next. And in that video, I'll also kind of give you an update on where you should be at in terms of your final product as you guys prepare your arguments for the Supreme Court case at the end of this. So nice job, and I'll see you in the next video.